Welcome back, everybody. Today we are going over the top 25 wide receivers in fantasy football. You see the first two tiers I have here. Let's just get it out of the way. DeAndre Hopkins, he gets released the other day by the Cardinals. Now we're waiting to see where he goes. That's why I have him in this F tier. F obviously does not mean they're bad. It's just the bottom of the top 25. He could honestly go anywhere from B to F depending on the landing situation. I've seen him be linked to like Dallas, Philly, teams that are kind of already clustered at the wide receiver position. Those would not be ideal. But Kansas City, maybe Buffalo. Buffalo's a little bit crowded, sort of. Diggs is going to take a lot of work, but I think Kansas City's probably the best fit there. So I'm going to keep him an F until we know where he goes. Next up is Brandon Ayuk at wide receiver 25 for me. I have him projected slightly over 1,000 yards. Last year with Brock Purdy, he played a lot better than he did with Trey Lance, and it seemed like George Kittle and Ayuk were the guys for Purdy. Not as much Deebo Samuel. He had a big time down year. I'm still into Deebo Samuel. I think with the injuries he dealt with last year and how the whole offense kind of changed, I think they're going to bring him back into it a little bit more this year. That's why I have him ranked a tier higher. But I like Ayuk this year. He's going in drafts past wide receiver 30, so you can get him at a huge discount. Love him in the late rounds. Then we got Michael Pittman Jr., who with Anthony Richardson is going to be tough because the volume last year he had 98 or 99 receptions. That's not quite going to happen again this year. I had him projected at 88 and a half. Still going to get over 1,000 yards, but his touchdowns on a team that's going to be extremely run heavy should fluctuate a lot. Who knows how much Richardson will actually throw when they have him and JT behind an okay O-line, but they're going to try to make that O-line as great as for the running game as possible. But Pittman they used with a ridiculously low ADOT last year. You wouldn't expect a contested catcher kind of like him to have 99 receptions in a year. But they really used him a lot in the slot, a lot just around the line of scrimmage, a lot of short routes because the O-line wasn't really holding up and the quarterback play was not great. So it's a tricky one. A lot of ups, a lot of downs. That's why we have him in the F tier. Then we got Mike Evans the first in the E tier, wide receiver 23 for me. Baker Mayfield obviously is going to start, but we don't love him. The backup Kyle Trask, probably not much better. This is more of a play betting on the talent of Mike Evans. I mean, his whole career, he gets 1,000 yards every season. I don't think that'll stop now. I think his touchdowns will slightly get hurt. My projections for Mike Evans are 69.5 receptions, 1,043 yards, and 7.5 touchdowns. Now, 7.5 touchdowns kind of seems low for him, a guy who's had 4 seasons above 10 touchdowns. But with Baker Mayfield, I think that's going to come down. I think the pass volume of this offense will still be fairly high, but not quite as high as the Jameis Winston and Tom Brady days because Baker just isn't that guy. Then we got Deebo Samuel. We already talked about him a little bit. He's a gadget guy. He's going to have a good amount of touchdowns. My projections for him it was a little tough, honestly. I gave him 67.5 catches for 945 yards, 3 receiving touchdowns, 272.5 yards on the ground with 2.5 touchdowns on the ground for a total of 222 fantasy points. That is 4 more than Mike Evans, for those wondering, in full point PPR. So, very volatile depending on who's quarterback. I prefer him with Purdy. I love all the guys with Purdy much more than Lance or Darnold. I think Purdy's clearly the best. I do think he'll start week 1. At least he'll start after week 4 to 6, I would assume, unless something very bad went wrong in the surgery. Next up is Jerry Jeudy. I talked about this in yesterday's video where I went over the teams, gave all the teams a tier list. I like Denver this year. With Sean Payton coming in, I think he's a top 5 mastermind on offense in the NFL. I already explained how he's going to kind of turn Russell Wilson around, similar to how he did with Drew Brees when Drew Brees was getting older in his career and he had kind of a noodle arm. I think this offense around Jerry Jeudy is going to kind of thrive a little bit. He performed very well towards the end of if you check his last 5 weeks, 6 weeks, he had a 3 touchdown game and a game of over 140 or 150 yards. Go look that up. He was very good, and it kind of went unnoticed because of the situation he was in. Now, the next receiver up, I'm going to put the whole next tier up right now. This is the whole next tier, the D tier. McLaurin, Cooper, Higgins, Devonta, and Godwin. We'll start with Terry. Terry gets Sam Howell. Is that an upgrade? Probably not. I kind of want Brissett to play, if we're being honest. Brissett made Amari Cooper look pretty good last year. Deshaun Watson with Amari Cooper didn't look so great. We'll get to Amari in a second, but Terry dealing with Sam Howell, we'll see. He's dealt with bad quarterback play his entire career. I still haven't projected over 1,100 yards, I believe. Let me check real quick. Yeah, I got him at 1,134, 77.5 receptions, 5.5 touchdowns for 223.9 PPR points. He's just going to be solid. No upside. He will not be getting you 1,500 yards anytime soon. He will not be getting you 10-plus touchdowns. That's not the guy he is. That's not the offense this is. But he's a very solid option if you need a receiver and you don't want the risky Christian Watson Watson or a DeAndre Hopkins or Michael Pittman, he's a little bit safer than them. Then Amari Cooper. He's one who does have upside. With Deshaun Watson, we really could see a 1,300-yard season, even though he's actually surprisingly never crossed 1,200 yards in his entire career. But I think this could be the year where he takes either a step forward or he regresses due to age. So that's why I still have him in this D tier. He has more of a high-low ceiling floor combination, and then Terry McLaurin has that kind of average. Then T. Higgins. A lot of people loving T. Higgins, but he honestly has never really outproduced his ADP a whole lot. So T. Higgins, my projections are 82.5 receptions, 1,110 yards, 6.5 touchdowns. He gets about 1,100 yards every single year. I'm seeing that again this year. Ja'Marr Chase obviously is going to be the alpha, and even though Ja'Marr Chase missed 5 games last year, T. Higgins missed 3 himself, but he didn't really take advantage when he had no Ja'Marr Chase. So I don't really see a scenario, unless Ja'Marr Chase goes down like week 1, where T. Higgins kind of pops off and finishes as like a top 7 receiver in the NFL, unless there's a lot of injuries across the league. He kind of just doesn't have that profile, being the wide receiver 2 on that team. And then we get to Devonta Smith, basically the same exact situation. I have similar projections for each of them. They're both the wide receiver 2 in their offense. The Eagles are not a super pass-heavy offense. They improved last year, but they're still not near the top by any means in the league. So he would need an A.J. Brown injury to really go off. Fairly inconsistent week to week. If you guys had Devonta Smith, sometimes you got a 9-point game. Other times you had 35. You're like, what the hell's going on? That's the guy you're going to get there. That's kind of this whole tier. And then Chris Godwin, actually, probably, it's going to be weird to say, but probably the safest option in this tier. A lot of people, obviously, Baker Mayfield, not going to be great, but a lot of people are kind of waiting to draft him. Like, he's falling to like the 6th, 7th, 8th round in a lot of drafts. I think he's very consistent. Last year, over 100 receptions. Again, the first year off an ACL, only playing, I think, starting about 14 games. Like, that is insane. The first year off an ACL, Saquon looked bad. I don't think Javonte or Breece are going to look great this year. Cortland Sutton looked bad last year. Most people do not come back from an ACL and drop 1,000 yards and 100 receptions. So even with Baker, he can hit people across the middle. He worked with Jarvis Landry for a while. Similar player to Chris Godwin, but Chris Godwin is miles better than Landry. So I think he's still going to have a 100 reception season for well over 1,000 yards. The next tier goes like this. We got Calvin Ridley, Keenan Allen, Chris Olave, and DK Metcalf in this order from right to left. That's how all the tiers are going, by the way. The worst receiver in the tiers on the right. So Calvin Ridley, I have big expectations for, but there's always that chance that he kind of has the Deshaun Watson syndrome where he missed a lot of time, about 2 years of football. He may not be the same off the rip, but towards the end of the year, hopefully by week 17, he'll have something figured out. I have high hopes for him. My projection for Calvin Ridley is 84.5 receptions, 1,194 yards, 6.5 touchdowns, and that is just a median. So he has the upside of 1,400 yards in that offense. You know Trevor Lawrence wants to chuck the ball deep. You could just see it in his eyes all last year. He was fed up throwing to Zay Jones, Christian Kirk, Evan Ingram, and Travis Etienne. The only one who went anywhere downfield was Zay Jones, and his yards per reception was only like 10. Calvin Ridley is a true deep threat, okay? Check his air yards from previous years. This man is a demon downfield, so love me some Calvin Ridley in the 4th, 5th round. Then we got Keenan Allen. He's slipping. He's really slipping. He's going like a full round behind Calvin Ridley on Underdog Fantasy, about pick 50-ish. I love him there. I mean, last season, he was on pace for well over 1,200 yards. He came back off the hamstring injury. It looked great, and no one really cares. Everyone's just kind of saying, oh, he's super old, so he's going to do bad. But he's never been a receiver that thrives on athleticism. Like, he's not a guy that's burning you downfield. He is just outmaneuvering you in the slot. So the projection I have on him is honestly fairly lofty. Where is it at? Keenan Allen, 101.5 receptions, 1,190 yards, 5.5 receptions, or 5.5 touchdowns. So the touchdown number, not too high. He could always, get to that 7-8 range, but I think it's going to be mainly Mike Williams, Quentin Johnston, Austin Eckler. But he's going to get receptions. Like, there's no doubt about it. He will have games of almost 15 targets. You can guarantee it. Jalen Waddle, on the other hand, will probably not have too many games of 15 targets. He didn't have very many catches last year. I believe it was in the 70s or 80s. But this year I have him projected for 83.5 receptions, 1,280 yards, 6.5 touchdowns. So this is 253 full-point PPR points. That's about the same as Keenan Allen. The reason I have him a little bit higher, just because he's more explosive. He could have a season of 1,500 yards if something happens to Tyreek Hill. He's basically an amped-up T. Higgins or Devonta Smith. He had a much better year than both of them last year from a fantasy perspective, over 1,300 yards. And he's kind of a touchdown machine. He only had 7 last year, but like the touchdowns he had were all just amazing downfield plays or ones that he just grabs and takes to the house. So he has that element of explosiveness that T. Higgins and Devonta don't really quite have. Then Chris Olave. it's in the same bracket as those guys, but he's actually the one on his team. I love Michael Thomas, but last year when I watched him play, he looked a little bit slow like a tight end to me. So I think that Derek Carr, who has a great downfield pass, like we saw him with Nelson Aguilar 2 years ago, then Devontae Adams last year, he still has that deep ball on lock. And Chris Olave was amazing deep down the field last year. He just had Andy Dalton and Jameis Winston throwing to him, which obviously Jameis missed almost every deep ball he threw. If you guys watched the Saints at all, it was not so fun to watch. My projection on Chris Olave, 91.5 receptions, 1,246 yards, 6.25 TDs for 253.6. So barely above Keenan Allen once again, barely above Jalen Waddle, but it's that presence of being the clear wide receiver one on his team that kind of puts him in a little bit above on the tier for me, but still same tier. Then DK Metcalf. His projection is very interesting. I have him moving back kind of when he was with Russell Wilson to that deep threat role. Last year, his ADOT came way down because they didn't really have a slot receiver. Him and Tyler Lockett had to kind of combine in the slot to help each other out there. Now they have Jackson Smith and Jigba, so I think he's going to focus a lot more on the outsides of the field, which means he'll get less receptions, but each reception will be further downfield, more likely for big plays. So lowered his receptions. He has 83.5 for 1,224 yards, 9 touchdowns for 260 fantasy points. So stud, absolute stud. Have him at the top of the tier. I think Tyler Lockett and Smith and Jigba will both be great options this year. Lockett could even rival Metcalf, but I think Metcalf's role is the most secure for now. Then the next tier is very interesting because I have it probably backwards to most people. This is how I have it. So A.J. Brown, 4th in the B tier here. Now, A.J. Brown's projection is still good. Let me read it to you. It is 83.5 receptions, 1,300 yards, 9.25 touchdowns for 269 full PPR points. Now, if you guys want access to all my projections for running backs, tight ends, QBs, receivers, everything, go to the Dub Club. It's the first link in the description here. It's free to join for now, but it will cost some money, so hop in there. I don't know how long it'll be free for, like maybe couple more weeks, and then during the season I'll be releasing all my betting plays and all my tips and everything and strategy for fantasy drafts as we move closer, so you guys will want to be in there. It's fairly cheap. So DK Metcalf, or sorry, not DK, AJ Brown, 83.5 receptions, 1,300 yards, 9 touchdowns. Okay, I don't see him getting 1,500 yards again. He was very inconsistent with the way he did it last year. He had a bunch of huge blow-up games, which he will always have, but the way it got done last year was just uber efficient. 17 yards per reception, I just don't quite see again. He'll still be an alpha, but the other 3 guys in this tier, in my opinion, have a much clearer path to 100-plus receptions. I have all of them over 100-plus receptions. CeeDee Lamb, the next guy on this list, I have CeeDee at 101.5 receptions, 1,282 yards, so slightly less, 7.5 touchdowns, slightly less, but he projects for 281.5 full-point PPR points. With Mike McCarthy calling the plays, this is why you may realize that's a slightly worse projection than he had last year. Mike McCarthy's probably going to call a lot more run plays. Even with Pollard, I think they'll probably sign like a Fournette or Zeke for a cheap deal. So they will still run the ball, probably more than they did last year. They also brought in Brandon Cooks, and Michael Gallup is now a full year removed from the ACL tear, so he should be good to go. So I have CeeDee Lamb a little bit worse than last year, but still a great volume play. Very similar to the next guy on this list, Amon-Ra. Both of them going to get a ton of receptions. Amon-Ra St. Brown, I've projected 7 more points per game. Or not points per game. Jesus, that would be insane. 7 more points total. 114.5 receptions, 1,267 receiving yards, 6.5 touchdowns. Then I got some rushing yards as well. The rushing yards are 73.5 and 0.2 touchdowns on the season. Yes, a decimal. But Amon-Ra, he missed about 3 games last year. Two of them don't count as missed games, but he played less than 30% in each of them because of that concussion, I believe it was. And he wasn't quite healthy coming back from that. So give him the benefit of the doubt. Still got over 100 receptions, is on pace for, I think it was like over 120 receptions last year. So I think he'll have a phenomenal year. Jameson Williams is going to miss the first 6 games. That is great. Then obviously Garrett Wilson. I mean, come on, guys. Garrett Wilson's projection's amazing. Little worse than Amon-Ra, but the upside is higher with Rodgers. That's why I have him higher. He projects 5 points worse, 103.5 receptions, 1,335 yards, 7.75 TDs for 283 full-point PPR points. Now, as I said, Rodgers comes in. I think there's a chance he has 1,500 yards. That's like the high outcome, and like 12 touchdowns. He could realistically pull off that Davante Adams type of role, where I don't think CeeDee Lamb or Amon-Ra quite have that in their range of outcomes. I could see Garrett Wilson even getting like 1,600 yards if everything goes well. So that's why I have him at the top of the B tier. Next up are these three receivers in this order. Diggs is our wide receiver 6 overall, projected at 297 points. So, Josh Allen says he's going to run less, which maybe means they throw more, but then they bring in Damien Harris, which means they're probably going to run more, just without Josh Allen. He's going to do his thing. He really fell off towards the end of the year. The beginning of the year, Stephon Diggs was the wide receiver 1 for a while, then Kupp and Jefferson took over. And throughout the end of the year, I think he only had like one good game. It was like 8 to 9 games in a row that were just busts, including the playoffs. When he played the Bengals, he had like 10 targets and got 40 yards. It was terrible. So very inconsistent. I do have hope for him again this year. I still think he's going to get over 1,300 yards, but I don't think he'll come close to 1,500 yards like he's been doing in the past. Then we got Ja'Marr Chase. Now, most sites have Ja'Marr Chase as like the wide receiver 2, maybe 3-ish. I am as my wide receiver 5. Now, the reason for this is because they've completely changed the way they play Ja'Marr Chase. Now, last year, in only 12 games, he had 87 receptions, which was 5 or 6 more than the year before. And that year, he played all the games. So this changes a lot. The way defenses play him is now cover 2, where they bracket him over the top, and a lot of stuff has to come from underneath. So we won't be seeing as many deep touchdowns. I am pleased to see that he still, in only 12 games, scored 9 touchdowns last year. So I still have him projected for 11 touchdowns. My stat line for him is 104 receptions, more than you'd probably expect for Ja'Marr Chase, but I am counting in that defenses play him different now. 1,460 yards, 11 touchdowns, 22 rushing yards for 318 points. You could, if you really want to, put him above Davante Adams, who we'll talk about in a second, just because he's more job security in the fact that he doesn't have Jimmy G throwing to him. It is Joe Burrow. But you could also counter your argument that Davante Adams has been more consistent, less injury prone. So it's really choose whatever you want. Davante proved to me, though, that it does not matter who his quarterback is. I don't think he'll do quite what he did last year with Derek Carr. I have him at 1,475 yards, 11 touchdowns, and 112 receptions. So more receptions than last year, because he was actually surprisingly very inefficient. He had 180 targets, only 100 catches, so I have more in the catches department. But his receiving yards, about the same. Touchdowns, I dropped it by 4 just because Derek Carr really looked at him in the red zone. I don't think Jimmy G will quite do that, but this gives us 326 points. That is 8 more than Ja'Marr Chase. That brings us to the top tier. Tyreek Hill, Justin Jefferson, Cooper Kupp. In this order. So Tyreek Hill, I have projected at 123 receptions, 1,760 yards, 6.5 touchdowns. Some rushing production as well for 345 points. That is 20 more than Davante Adams. So this top tier is really good. He was on pace to get 2,000 yards at one point in the season. Then Tua had the concussion issues. Then he wasn't able to play. He had 5 games where Tua did not play. So that's Teddy B and Skylar Thompson. And I believe in one of those Teddy Bridgewater games, he had over 170 yards. Like, Tyreek Hill makes shit happen. It really does not matter who's throwing to him. But if he does have a full season of Tua, I think he leads the league in receiving yards. That's what my projections say. Touchdowns, on the other hand, though, only 6.5. That's not great. He is not the red zone threat that Cooper Kupp or Davante Adams or even Ja'Marr Chase is. I think he is, but they just don't use him that way. Same with Waddle. They don't really just use the receivers like that. So his receiving total is pretty low in the touchdown department. But if that has positive regression, oh my goodness, he could literally blow everybody out of the water. The next projection is at our wide receiver 2, Justin Jefferson, for 350 fantasy points. I got him at 1,720 yards, 120 receptions, 9.5 touchdowns. A little bit of positive regression there in the touchdowns. He's been a little bit unlucky so far in his career. I think he could get into the double digits fairly easily. He's most people's wide receiver 1, but when you look at Cooper Kupp's pace of statistics last year, he averaged more points per game than Jefferson, and his receptions was on pace for like 150 to like break his previous year's reception record. This dude is insane. So it's really pick your poison here. The real difference maker in my projection for Kupp is that I have him at 11.5 touchdowns. I have him at 1,750 yards, 135 receptions. This is 34 points higher 34 points higher than Jay Jett is. I know, that's a lot. 384 compared to 350. It's a lot, but he gets targeted more receptions, and he's a better red zone threat, and Stafford actually looks at him more in the red zone. Plus, there's less competition on the Rams. He's literally the only guy. So this is the complete tier list of wide receivers. Screenshot it if you want. Drop a comment. Let me know if you guys really love these long format videos. Let me know what other ideas you want to see. I'm going to be coming out with fantasy content, regular football content all summer long. So make sure to subscribe, follow, like it up, comment what you want to see, and I appreciate you guys all being here. I'll catch you guys in the next one. Everybody, I'll see you later. Peace.